Does the mere holding of elections in a country mean the country is democratic? Here is a paradox that elections held in 2018 worldwide have thrown up. As more countries hold elections, the world is becoming less democratic. Today, we look at those elected leaders who have consolidated unbridled power and become more authoritarian by railroading constitutional mandates, and the newly minted authoritarians whose far-right rhetoric won them big mandates as voters increasingly gravitate towards these strongmen, evidenced in the rise of the far-right in Europe. With a 76% majority, Russian strongman Vladimir Putin started another 6-year term as the president of Russia in March this year. In an election marked by protests and the arrests of hundreds, the strongman's main and perhaps only rival, Alexei Navalny, was barred from contesting. Non-governmental election monitoring groups reporting voting irregularities were cracked down upon. The country's longest-serving leader since Joseph Stalin, the former KGB spy, started his 4th consecutive term this year. His last term was marked by the passage of a diktat, making it illegal for media to comment on elections and the abolition of the direct election of governors. 2018 has been marked by sporadic outbursts against the arrest of Alexei Navalny and the country's 2013 anti-gay law that bans non-traditional sexual relationships for, quote, the purpose of protecting children from information advocating for a denial of traditional family values. Flailing popularity has been met with propaganda. In September, Russian state media launched a new television program, Moscow, Kremlin, Putin, devoted to the weekly activities of the president. The first episode praised Putin's wonderful physique, his love for children, and joked that even wild animals are afraid of the Kremlin strongman. Xi Jinping will remain in power until death, following a vote that abolished presidential term limits in April this year. The 62-year-old is also the chief of the military and the general secretary of the Communist Party. Son of a Chinese communist veteran, Xi rose through the ranks of the party and is arguably the most powerful leader in China since Mao Zedong, who was the autocratic founding father of the People's Republic of China and the Communist Party. Under Xi, the Chinese government has notched up surveillance and cracked down on the media. Across the country, over 170 million CCTV cameras have been installed and police equipped with instant recognition glasses that identify each citizen and pull up all their data. China also announced plans for the 2020 launch of a big data-based dystopian social credit system which will score citizens on the basis of their behavior and maintain a blacklist. Those with low social credit will be penalized, barred from the best schools, from high-paying jobs, even hotels and travel. 2018 has been characterized by a crackdown against the rich and famous Chinese, including actress Fan Bingbing and Interpol chief Meng Hongwei, for extravagance or tax evasions. Individuals under the government scanner disappear for a few days and are reportedly re-educated. As many as 1 million Uyghur Muslims were also reportedly sent to so-called re-education centers this year. While the government maintains the camps are for vocational training, rights groups have claimed they run indoctrination programs or communist propaganda and propaganda about President Xi Jinping. With 97% votes cast in his favor, Egypt's Abdel Fattah el-Sisi won his second term as president in April this year. The only alternative name on the ballot was Musa Mustafa Musa, a supporter of the president. Potential candidates were charged with treason, conspiracy, investigated by the country's public prosecutor. One potential candidate's home was raided and his name added to the country's terror list. Supporters of political rivals were intimidated. In July, Egypt's parliament passed an anti-fake news law that authorizes the government to punish journalists and any personal social media accounts with 5,000 followers whom they feel are violating the law. In September, an Egyptian court sentenced 75 people to death for their participation in the 2013 sit-in at Cairo's Rabah Square in support of President Mohamed Morsi after the army toppled him. 664 others face various charges. Moreover, the Egyptian president has been mulling a constitutional amendment for the removal of presidential term limits and the lengthening of a presidential term from the present 4 years. The move would require a referendum and, if passed, would make him leader for life, like, you guessed it. Hungary's right-wing Prime Minister, Viktor Orban, started a third consecutive term in office this April, with over half the votes cast in his favour. Tens of thousands of Hungarians marched against the re-election of the right-wing leader, who ran a shrill nativist campaign, allegedly used fake videos to bolster his propaganda war on migration, and published a weekly blacklist containing names of several hundred civil society activists and independent journalists as enemies of the state. The 55-year-old Prime Minister, who raised a mammoth 175-kilometer long, 4-meter high razor wire fence on the Hungarian-Serbian border in 2015 to keep out migrants, has repeatedly blamed all of Hungary's woes, from its collapsing education system to widespread political corruption, on migrants. Often called a soft fascist, Orban has rewritten the constitution, passed new laws to give the ruling coalition election advantage, and in the past 2 elections floated fake parties to split the opposition vote in competitive districts. In September, the European Parliament voted to sanction Hungary for flouting EU rules on democracy, civil rights and corruption. Earlier this year, scholars at the Corruption Research Center in Budapest examined more than 126,000 government contracts issued by the Orban government between 2010 and 2016 to find that contracts had been issued to companies owned by 4 hyper-wealthy men, all current or former Orban allies, without due process. Recep Tayyip Erdogan's victory in the June election that in effect completed Turkey's transition from a parliamentary democracy to an executive presidency was best described by the Washington Post. How Mr. Erdogan accomplished this opens a window on the autocrat's handbook for the 21st century. What authoritarians have figured out is not to cancel elections, as old-fashioned dictators used to do, or fake them entirely, but rather to hold the vote and control the circumstances so tightly that no one else can win. The latest Turkish campaign was neither free nor fair. Here's how Erdogan did it. In April 2017, Turkey voted on a referendum to bolster presidential powers, which so far had only been a nominal position. It gave the president, or Erdogan, near absolute power over the economy, the military, power to appoint judges and dissolve parliament at will. The elections in June were held under a state of emergency. More than 50,000 people were arrested. There was and continues to be a heavy clampdown on the media. In a widely contested election that was boycotted by the opposition and saw a voter turnout of only 48%, Venezuela's Nicolás Maduro won a second 6-year term as president this May. Since his re-election, Maduro's popularity has fallen to less than 30%, as inflation has spiraled upwards of 1 million percent, and shortages of food and medicine have grown more acute. Hundreds of soldiers have deserted their posts. Dozens have been arrested in connection with alleged coup plots. In January, a dissident intelligence police commander, Oscar Perez, was executed for flying a helicopter over government institutions and allegedly throwing grenades at the country's Supreme Court last year. Maduro formed a constituent assembly to rewrite the constitution, the end result being the nullifying of the opposition-led legislature, putting President Nicolás Maduro in firm control of the country. Brazil's new president, Jair Bolsonaro, nicknamed Trump of the Tropics, will democratically assume office in January 2019. A former army captain, Bolsonaro rose to popularity through a divisive social media campaign, winning right-wing votes for his hardline stand on violence and abortion, often extolling Brazil's 1964 to 1985 military government. A dark age for the Latin American country where opponents, academics, and activists were regularly tortured and executed. LA Now or Not Him protests against Bolsonaro's homophobic and misogynistic comments were held across the country leading up to elections. Bolsonaro has told a congresswoman he would never consider raping her, equated homosexuality to pedophilia, justified the gender pay gap. He's gone on record to say having a daughter is a weakness and promised to relax gun laws. To a large population of Brazil, however, especially young male voters, Bolsonaro represents an antidote to a lack of public facilities, a broken economy, widespread political corruption, and the election's prime concern, rising crime rate. In April, Azerbaijan's Ilham Aliyev won a fourth term as president in an election boycotted by major opposition parties who accused him of suppressing political dissent. In July, Cambodian Prime Minister Hun Sen, who has been in power since 1985, announced his party had won all 125 parliamentary seats in a general election that lacked any serious challengers. In March, in an election dominated by immigration debate, Italy voted in two anti-establishment populist parties, the Five Star Movement and the League Party. And in September, Sweden's far-right Flower Power Swedish Democrats Party made unprecedented gains and won over 17% of the vote, though they were unable to form the government. Keep watching this space for more. Love your morning fix? Help support our journalism. Subscribe to Scroll Plus using the link in the description.